And we're back to continue our conversation about the life and the legacy of John W. Walker Baker. As Mr. Mays was pointing out a second ago, this was not just in John Walker's mind, and I heard him say this many times. This isn't just about black kids, about all kids.
Well, it's about all kids, Steve. My kids all went to the Little Rock School District, and they got a diverse, integrated education. Academically, it was great. But what's carried my family forward, and to the great benefit of my family, is that diverse interaction where you get to know people, you get to understand people, you spend time with people, and you understand how to get along with people and how to make things work in a community. And that's the value. I struggled with John several times, talking, John, we've got to get these kids in integrated schools. It's not enough to double fund a bunch of schools and to push money into schools. If you isolate, segregate, poor kids, they're too smart. They understand that separate schools are never equal, and that's what's so disappointing about the state right now. They continue to push Little Rock, kick Little Rock in the teeth. They run charter schools in that recruit, very clearly recruit a different demographic than exists generally in the city, and they don't do their fair share of heavy lifting, all in the name of competition, all in the name of some sort of ideal that it'll work for some kids, but they push and isolate poor kids, and I can't stand it. John couldn't stand that, and that's what's killing Little Rock. That's where the state is exposed right now. That and this odd thing of sort of on the way out of the picture, they throw a stink bomb in the school district and blow the union out. That was the silliest thing. Anybody that's ever managed anything would tell you that's ridiculous and very it's not only hurtful, it was hateful, and that's wrong. And the state ought to step up, and the governor ought to step up and say, we're through kicking Little Rock in the mouth.
I sense another program coming on at a little later date, but anyway, Ms. Flowers, you want to pick it up there?
Yeah, I just would piggyback on that and point out that oftentimes there are these efforts made to address what we know that at the root of is racism, and then its tentacles spill into the other issues, housing, poverty. So, whether we're talking about health, whether we're talking about academia and higher education, or our public schools, or even employment, when we make an effort and say, okay, we're going to address this by establishing a system of busing to integrate the schools, or we're going to be the Nixon administration and say we're going to establish, people don't realize this, we're going to establish affirmative action so that we can be intentional. That came from a Republican administration. But when we don't provide the resources behind it, and when we treat it like this is temporary and we're just going to do this for show, or do this and let these folks over here handle it, and then if John Walker doesn't fix it, or if the Minority Health Commission doesn't fix it, or if the diversity folks within this company don't fix it, we did our best and then it's over. Now we need to try something else. So we'll put in charter schools in the school system. And what's unnerving to me is when you look at the history of public education in this country, particularly once there were measures taken to be intentional and put resources behind integrating schools across this country. I went to integrated schools. I had a wonderful education. And the cultural interaction, that matters. Right now, schools across, if you look at the NCSL effort and report behind what they're trying to do to establish great policies globally, school systems and countries model themselves after what we used to do. Because having professionalized teaching faculties who are supported, who are paid properly, having curriculum that we know that works, and providing resources behind schools in integrated and diverse rooms, schoolhouses, we know that works. And it's like everything that we're doing now, it diffuses it and we don't address the issues. It's long term. If we're going to address it, we have to put resources and face it to fix it.
Steve, let me talk a little bit more about what you were asking about, John's legacy. And we've spoken here mostly about education, but we're talking about a 50-plus year career. Mm-hmm. And during that 50-plus years, John was always willing to address issues in the society as a whole. not only in schools, but in jobs, in housing, in the criminal justice system. And he reminded us at all times, I mean, he reminded the public generally that there are still issues out there. Was he always right? Probably not. Nobody's always right, and nobody's always absolutely right in the approach that they take, but he took an approach that said, look, folks, you need to think about these things. You need to worry about these things. You need to mobilize around these issues. And by having an intelligent discussion in all areas of the society, you'll find some solutions, but we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that, but John always said, you've got to do it. And he did it by filing lawsuits. He did it by raising issues that made people uncomfortable. And look, the only way we address important issues is to be a little bit uncomfortable about these issues. Not even a little bit. Sometimes you got to be downright uncomfortable. And that's what John did. He made people uncomfortable, and they had to think of it. But as we said, as everybody said during the service this morning, and as we've said here, and as Richard pointed out, John never was one who got angry and got in your face. I don't remember him ever getting in anybody's face. Do you, Richard?
No.
Never. Baker? Never. No.
John even viewed the role of lawyers more as social engineers. I always point out that and to a great extent, because of the class action suits that we filed, you had a history and a pattern of limited job opportunities in these industries. I remember Southwestern Bell when we and First National Bank
and AP&L when
and
you sued
AP&L.
That was your lawsuit.
The solutions always brought in at least upper echelon leadership, African American leadership at the upper echelon of the corporate, at the corporate level, and that interaction, in my opinion, created people like Sherman Tate,
Right.
The Charles Stewart at the First National Bank,
Marty North, got to represent the women.
and,
Marty North Hamilton.
And when you and I think that's the biggest impact. Those opportunities. When I was a kid, most of the African Americans who had degrees either were teaching or had to be working as postmen at the federal government. But that opportunity during this period of time changed. So you had people working at tellers in banks and working with the city government and the state government in different significant roles. Those opportunities, Timex opened up, watchmakers, and these opportunities, Southwestern Bell, these opportunities created a need for an educated support base too, and people who got an education could stay here in Arkansas and make a living. Otherwise, those people had to go west or go to Chicago or go to someplace outside of the South. And I think the ultimate impact of the activity, and I don't want to, of the law firm that John led with Kaplan and me, the ultimate impact of that, these class action lawsuits created cost. And the first thing you had to recognize is that racial discrimination is by its nature class. And if you certified a class against these corporations, the cost of that defense was substantial. So that would cause them to stop and think about the conduct, whether you were suing St. Vincent Hospital or the Little Rock Police Department. I mean, so the cost of litigation was also a deterrent, and in a way to kind of force a negotiation and a conversation about being diverse and inclusive. And I think John's biggest impact was in broadening that employment opportunity in a place like Little Rock or Arkansas.
Or Pine Bluff.
Or Pine Bluff.
International
West
paper.
Memphis, yeah, Baker Curry.
Well, you know, to honor a guy like John and all those people, including those in this room right now, who have worked so hard. I mean, John worked until the day his life ended. I mean, he was still smelling the smoke and hearing the thunder and running toward the battle. And you look at the Women's Emergency Committee, all those people, they've tried to make Little Rock a better place. Maybe others disagree and say, gosh, you pushed in the wrong direction, but his legacy and those needs to be projected into the future. We cannot simply say or settle for what we have now in our city and do the right thing by those who've come before, including John Walker and so many other leaders. And that's what impels so many people now, including myself, to reach out and reach up to try to make it a better place, to afford opportunity to those that don't have it, to get rid of this dual system that we've created. The state is creating a dual system, which is anathema to civil rights lawyers, to have two systems, one that serves poor, one that serves people that don't speak English, one that serves those who are disabled, and another, regardless of their race, it serves those of us who are already lifted up. It's the kind of thing that drives people crazy, that care about people, and that's John's legacy to me, is to push on, press on.
Read the other day an interview our friend Roby Brock did with Mr. Walker just a few months ago, and I took note of that. He's seen Ms. Flowers to retain his optimism after this long half-century worth of litigation and the frustrations that went along with it. He,
Yes.
dare I say it, he still believed in a place called hope.
Yes. So we had a few interesting conversations in the last year. We had several in our seats talking about what was before us to vote on or not to vote on. But when I served as chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, I would call him and ask him to do things. And he told me, Ms. Flowers, you're doing the right thing. You need to make relationships, and you can compromise, and you have time. He said, I don't have that kind of time. He said, I'm here on a mission, and that's what he did. He, sponsored some legislation, but he served as an agitator and a conscience for the legislature, and focused on where we could improve as a body and where we could improve as our rules. He was the gadfly, and if you didn't like him, you respected him. And so I think coming from where he came from in hope, and I'm saying that as an African American man in America at the time that he came up, seeing the things that he saw, seeing the injustices, some of which still occur today, and being at the forefront of leadership to change laws and practices and help create the kind of opportunities that you just heard Attorney Mays just talk about, I think you would have to be, you would have to have hope. He had a lot of grandchildren and family members. He had 5 children of his own. He was working up until his last day. That is not a person who is hopeless, and that is not a person who doesn't believe in the law or the Constitution, or doesn't believe in his own power as a leader or a citizen.
Time is fleeting. Phil Kaplan, I'll give you the final word.
Well, I agree that you can't continue to do the kinds of things that he did without being a believer in the system. He was a believer in the system, and he didn't lose hope. He did what he did because he believed in the perfectibility of making the society a better place. It was tikkun olam, making a better place for the world.
We got to end it there because we're simply out of time. To the 4 of you, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Steve.